Before we get started, I just want to note that viewer discretion is advised. This case can be very triggering. There's a lot of talk about some really horrific acts that happen, so I want everybody to be aware before they go forward. This security footage looks like an innocent man buying his daughter a soda, but the truth behind the video is far more sinister. But before we get started, welcome to True Crime with Maneater. If you love all things true crime, including missing person cases, cold cases, and just the strange happenings in the world, you've come to the right place. Be sure to subscribe and turn on alerts to never miss a video upload. Let's get started. In May of 2005, the GROENE family, made up of Brenda GROENE, who was 40, her boyfriend Mark McKenzie, who was 37, 13-year-old SLADE GROENE, 9-year-old Dylan GROENE, and his 8-year-old sister, SHASTA GROENE. So one day, SHASTA and her brother at their Idaho home, and they're playing outside in their bathing suits, and they're just enjoying the weather. It's May, it's a nice day, they're having a good time. Little did anybody know this one day of just 2 children playing outside would change the course of so many people's lives. Unknown to the GROENE family, they had been being watched. That day that SHASTA and Dylan had been playing in their yard, someone had noticed them as they were driving on the freeway. This person got off the freeway, parked their car, and began to watch the house. Until one evening when he felt sure that he had plenty of information from his surveillance that he broke into the home. And what's even more horrifying about this tale is he came prepared. He had on night vision goggles and he was dressed in all black. He had planned and surveilled this family for quite a few days. Joseph Edward Duncan had quite the checkered past. He was a level 3 sex offender and spent most of his life in and out of prison. He crept to the house, he broke in, and when he got inside, sheer terror was awaiting the family. Once inside the house, he gets the whole family up. Shasta's mother actually came in and got her and said that somebody was there to harm them. And of course, Shasta is this 8-year-old child and she doesn't really know what's happening, but she knows it's scary and she knows it's bad. And seeing her mother like that obviously terrified her. Joseph Duncan's plan for that evening was to take the 2 children. He had planned to kidnap Dylan and Shasta. Instead of just going in the house and trying to abduct these 2 children, he brutally murdered an entire family. He would end up tying up Brenda, Mark, and her son Slade. And once he has them secure, he beats them to death with a hammer. And this was a brutal crime. There was blood everywhere. This wasn't a quick way to murder someone. It was not only brutal and time-consuming, it took a lot of energy to do so. And as he's murdering Brenda and Mark and Slade, Dylan and Shasta are outside, and she recalls hearing her mother try to scream, but not being able to get it fully out. And she knew something terrible had happened. He then kidnapped Shasta and Dylan and took them into the woods in Montana. And in a cabin in Montana, the 2 children went through horrific things. He not only abused them, but he sexually assaulted them. Shasta would go on to say that most of his anger was typically taken out on Dylan. And although Shasta was younger than Dylan, she took on the role as protector. Dylan was becoming progressively hopeless. He didn't feel like they were going to get out of this situation, and he's just a 9-year-old boy. He wants to go home. He wants to be with his family, and he's taking abuse and torture. Shasta would go on to say during an interview that anytime her and Dylan interacted and it seemed like maybe those 2 were more interested in each other than Joseph Duncan, Duncan would lose his cool and ramp up the abuse and torture. So Shasta, who again is only an 8-year-old child, does something that may have just saved her life. She began to focus her attention on Joseph Duncan. She'd ask him questions about his life. She would ask him about his family and if she could meet them one day. She was really trying to make him believe that they were friends. And this seemed to do something to Joseph. He became nicer to them. He even told them on occasion that he was going to take them home. Of course, this gave them hope. They're 2 children, 8 and 9 years old, in a terrible, horrifying situation. And I can only imagine the fear and the trauma that they were going through. Obviously, Joseph Duncan is a monster, but what he does next just highlights the fact that he really enjoyed torturing these 2 children, not just physically, but emotionally. He had already killed their mom and their stepdad and their brother. So he encouraged Dylan and Shasta to write a letter to their real father. He of course said that he was going to deliver it to their dad so that they could have it. Shasta's letter said, "Dear Dad, I miss you very much, and me and Dylan know what happened to Mom, Mark, and Slade, and we both feel very sorry for them. And we both miss you, Jesse, and Vance. and we might see you guys again. The last line of Shasta's letter speaks volumes, and we might see you guys again. I mean, as a child, writing that letter and stating that she might see her family again, it's not even a definite, but there's hope in there. And it's so heartbreaking to know that a child had to write that letter. Only a few days after the children wrote that letter, Joseph Duncan did something heinous. He took out his shotgun, walked very closely to Dylan, and shot him in the stomach. His sister recalls hearing Dylan plead for his life. Dylan would say to Joseph Duncan, "No, please don't," before getting struck in the stomach with a bullet that ended his life. He then fires another shot before going inside. And when he gets inside, Joseph Duncan is crying and he tells Shasta that it was an accident and he didn't mean to do it. He said he shot him a second time so that Dylan didn't have to feel pain. And then only a few days later, Joseph Duncan asked Shasta how she wants to die. This man is heinous. He is a monster. I can't imagine what was going through his head, asking an 8-year-old how she wanted to die. It just speaks volumes to the type of monster he was. He was cruel, not only physically, but emotionally and mentally. He abused them. And he even gave Shasta a choice. He said, "You have the choice to be strangled, or I can shoot you like I shot your brother." He even told her that if he shoots her, it's going to be quicker and she'll feel less pain. But Shasta chose to be strangled, and she thought this was the better way to go because she could try to talk him out of it. If she had been shot, she wouldn't have had the time to do so. And so he laid her on the ground, put a rope around her neck, and began to strangle her. And with one final breath, Shasta said, "Please don't, Jet." And Jet was a nickname Joseph Duncan went by. And she had noticed over the course of those few weeks that he had held them captive, anytime she used that, it seemed to soften him. When she said that, he suddenly let go of the rope and she could breathe. She got oxygen and she's inhaling. And Joseph Duncan casually says, "What did you say?" And after that, he started crying and he told her that he couldn't do this. He couldn't kill her. And then Joseph does something completely shocking. He tells Shasta that he wants to take her home to meet his mother. Of course, Shasta says yes to this, that she wants to go and she wants to meet his mother. She's thinking, of course, that she can get help this way. And this is where that surveillance video comes into play. They stopped at a gas station on the way to see his mother. And you can see how Shasta looks. She has her arms crossed. She looks like she's in discomfort or has an attitude if you didn't understand what was happening behind the scenes. But when you watch the video and you know what this child was going through, you can see the sheer anguish in her body language. So they're driving and they drive past places Shasta knows. He drove by her elementary school. They go by one of her best friend's house. And they even drove by a billboard with her face and her brother's face on it. It said missing children, reward, and then had a phone number. And then at about 2 a.m., they finally pull over and they go into a local Denny's to get something to eat. And a waitress kind of has this feeling that something is wrong. So she keeps her eye on Shasta the entire time. So they're at this Denny's and they're seated and this waitress only has them. It's 2 a.m, so she's really kind of hyper-focused and she notices that the dynamic between the two is quite strange. And this waitress is hyper-focused already because she's starting to think that something is wrong and they're her only clients, so she's really, really focused in. And she notices the dynamic between the two seems really strange. Shasta wouldn't speak without permission and he kind of spoke for her and the girl was really quiet and contained and something just really made the hairs on the back of her neck stand up. She knew something was wrong. So she gets the girl a milkshake and she goes in the back and she tells her manager, "I think that's Shasta." And the manager's like, I'm not sure. And she's like, "Listen, if it's not and we call the police, I will take full responsibility. I will pay for their meal. I just think we need to call the police." And the manager is like, "You know what? You're right." So they call the police and they kind of delay the food order while they wait for police to get there. And so they're waiting for their food and a cop comes in the doors. And I can't imagine that feeling of relief. So as Joseph Duncan and Shasta are waiting for their food, a police officer walks in the door and he walks right up to them. And although Shasta is feeling like just maybe this horrific ordeal will come to an end, she also believes that maybe Joseph Duncan will have an excuse for why he has her. So when the police officer comes up to her, he looks at her and he says, "What is your name?" And she instantly looks at Joseph Duncan. And Joseph Duncan says, "You can tell him." She looks at the police officer and she says, "My name is Shasta." And instantly the police officer tells Joseph to stand up and put his hands behind his back. He was arrested right on the spot. The police end up taking Joseph Duncan outside, and they asked the waitress who had been taking care of them and who had called the police to sit with Shasta. Is your brother outside? Is he in the car? You know, where is he? And Shasta said to her, he's in heaven. And of course, the waitress could not believe any of this. I mean, what are the chances that this little girl walked into her restaurant where she's working and she just has a feeling, she calls the cops, and all she could do is hold the little girl and say that it was going to be okay and that she was going to go back to her dad. So not only did Joseph Duncan confess to the murders of Shasta's family, but he actually confessed to more crimes. What's even more terrifying is Duncan actually recorded many of his crimes against Dylan and Shasta. The footage was so disturbing that a senior investigator said it shook him to his core. So not only did he murder Shasta's family, he also killed another boy in April of 1997. He killed Anthony Martinez of California. Joseph Edward Duncan was actually found guilty and sentenced to death. But at the age of 58, while he was awaiting his death sentence, he died from stage 5 brain cancer. So Joseph Edward Duncan was a serial killer. He not only killed Anthony Martinez, he confessed to killing other children. And then he killed an entire family before kidnapping 2 of the children and then killing Dylan. He was an evil, terrible, miserable person. What's really interesting is Joseph Edward Duncan's brother, Bruce Duncan, talked about his brother in an interview. He said that although his brother was a level 3 sex offender and spent most of his life in and out of prison, he wasn't a monster. He said that he had thoughts and feelings like everyone else. He just didn't value human life. And although I can see why Bruce Duncan would say those things, it is his brother and they did grow up together, I think it's safe to say that Joseph Duncan was an actual monster. He did go on to say that he did not feel any pity for his brother and that he felt terribly sorry for the families that were affected by him. And Bruce Duncan would go on to say they grew up in a relatively normal home. They were a military family, so they moved every year or two and they traveled quite a bit. But then after his parents' divorce, Joseph Duncan, who is now 16, was convicted for raping a 14-year-old boy at gunpoint and was sent to prison. And that's his first crime that he was convicted of. That doesn't mean he didn't commit them before, but obviously for this one, he was caught. And Joseph Duncan would tell prison therapists that he suffered from abuse and incest, and he had actually molested numerous children before he was ever caught. But his brother, Bruce, goes on to say that he thinks those stories are fabricated because he lived in the same house and he was not abused and he hadn't witnessed any abuse. Of course, that doesn't mean that abuse didn't happen, but Bruce claims that it is a fabrication and none of what Joseph Duncan said is true. Bruce stated that throwing his brother Joseph into prison at the age of 16 is mostly the reason why he turned out the way he did. He said he was confused about his sexuality, and then you throw him in a prison full of people looking to perpetrate crimes against him, that it actually changed him. It changed the type of person he was. And although that could have played a role in it, I still feel like there was something seriously wrong with Joseph Duncan prior to his conviction at the age of 16. Bruce would also go on to say that during that time, he didn't pay much attention to the missing children. He didn't know his brother was on the run. He didn't really know anything about the case. And then he said after the arrest of his brother, him and his family became targets. And although his family has been targeted, he really doesn't hold much anger about it. He says he understands that people want to get to his brother and they can't. And this really is the only way they can get out their anger. But that's it for today, guys. If you like this video or any other video on my channel, be sure to subscribe and turn on alerts so you never miss a video upload. See you next time.